I'm the co-founder of Eforia, which is a sexual wellness and discovery app that you can get on the Apple App Store. And Elaine, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, all. My name is Elaine Safir. I am the other co-founder of Eforia. And today we're joined by Rachel Klechevsky, who is Eforia's sex therapist.
Hi.
Thanks for chatting with us, Rachel. Today we'll be talking about how to stay sexual during times of stress that I know a lot of us are experiencing right now due to COVID, due to political unrest, due to like personal difficulties of
just to 2020, just because
2020 garbage fire in general.
Yeah.
And I should also mention that we are all having a happy hour as we have this conversation. So cheers, ladies. Our happy hour is courtesy of Nasty Woman Wines, which is an unapologetically feminist wine brand here in the United States.
Nothing goes better with wine than talking with other women about your sex lives. So I'm very excited for tonight.
Absolutely. So to kick it off, Rachel, you're a sex therapist. Can you please tell our viewers what is sex therapy?
Sure. So, I mean, it kind of runs the gamut, but first and foremost, it is a mental health specialization. So when I say that it's a mental health specialization, that means that we do all the mainstream mental health kind of work. Obviously, each therapist and sex therapist specializes in their own kind of dynamics and their own types of therapy that they do, and different topics. So I work a lot with anxiety, with depression, with sleep disorders, with grieving, bereavement, life changes. So those are my specialties. And then on top of that, I specialize in sex and sexuality and relationships. So when there is a particular issue, either sexual dysfunction or something that is a little bit more abstract, like identity concerns or just like a physical issue that's not medical, that can't be tapped down, I have a wealth of resources and, techniques to help you along, but also I find the blockages, right? The emotional, the historical, the social, blocks that might stop somebody from really being free in their bodies and accepting pleasure in their lives.
It's almost like sex is also a symptom of other things that are going on. You can't kind of separate it. They have to go together.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sexuality touches so many aspects of our lives and we just don't give it enough credit. And we could, ask the chicken or the egg situation. If we're living in what's called a sex negative society. The idea of sex is, to be controlled and limited to very specific dynamics and for very specific purposes. And anything that runs outside of that is wrong and like morally reprehensible. And so sexuality, right, like a sex positive environment says actually sex doesn't have an inherent value. It is up to us to determine that value. And so I think because it is so controlled, and this is my own personal theory, because it's so controlled and, stigmatized, that it becomes a part of us in this alternative way, and that every aspect of our sexuality is now being touched on by these rules. So that's going to be our gender and like what's right for that, how we live in the world, how humans interact with each other, what are the norms and how like a person of a specific gender needs to behave. So all of that stuff gets touched on because of sex negativity. I truly believe that if we didn't live in a sex negative environment, sexuality would not be as much of a holistic experience in our lives. That might be somewhat controversial, but it's my stance.
As we started the call, I mean, we just said like 2020. I mean, you just have to say 2020 and people are like, oh my God, just like all these ideas of just a dumpster fire. That's all that pops in my head. I mean, do you think that also is impacting, the things that maybe your clients come in to see you? Like, have you seen just everything that we're going through this year being a significant impact in discussions that you're having?
Oh yeah. Absolutely. It's not even a question. It's not like you don't need to have research to acknowledge what you're looking at and what's right in front of your face. Every one of my clients, no matter what we're discussing, has been impacted by COVID one way or another in a profoundly difficult way. You know, I have polyamorous clients that can't see their partners and that are now like monogamous because they don't have any other way to be with their partners that is, you know, impactful for them. I have people that were dating and now they have no access to touch, you know, to kissing, to like basic intimacy, and certain levels of joy that are meant to keep us going no longer exist. So our lives are just, you know, compounded upon with really scary information and obligations. We don't have a lot of movement, and so that's gonna disengage us from our bodies and our joy.
Yeah, definitely. That makes so much sense. And I wonder, I know everybody is probably different, right? Like every client has very specific needs and very specific things you might advise them. But do you see any commonalities, anything that a lot of people share and a lot of people can perhaps benefit from the same kind of advice?
Well, yes, people's relationships to their bodies have shifted quite significantly. You know, like they've either disassociated or very anxiously have been, you know, working out, masturbating, like, you know, just like there's an anxiousness to their relationship with their body that either causes them to overwhelm it or to disassociate. And when I say overwhelm, that also includes overeating, for example, not just masturbation and exercise. People are flooding their bodies with something that can make them feel because it's just too intense.
Yeah, I mean, I know we were all baking bread, making sourdough for the first like 3 months of the pandemic, at least here in New York, it felt like we were. And then everybody was on the virtual happy hour. It's just like drowning our sorrows because we can't see our friends and we can't give somebody a hug when we even like pass them on the street. So now that we've been at it for a long time and it kind of sounds like this might continue, what kind of advice can you give people who are like, okay, winter is coming, we're going to be indoors a lot more, we're going to be separated from people we like, from that physical touch, from the connection, probably for like quite a bit longer. What can they do to just, you know, get through this and still feel like they're sexual, physical human beings when that physicality is now absent?
So I think that what's really important is that people determine who their pods are going to be. So if you have access to people, you know, figure out like who are the people and what are going to be the rules associated with this, right? So what I find interesting is, you know, people who are sex positive and live a sex positive life are very used to having boundary conversations with each other. And so, you know, COVID is just another extension of that. It's a little bit more difficult to navigate, obviously, but it's another layer of the conversations we've already been having. What COVID is doing is getting people who have never had the conversations to learn how to have boundary conversations, because death is an actual thing that can occur without the boundary conversations. So in all of that, I mean, I don't want to call this a silver lining because it's pretty bleak. But there is something beneficial in that, is that we're learning communication and boundary techniques that we've never had to consider before. I mean, we should have been, but we haven't. So this would mean, you know, like now that we have rapid tests available, especially throughout New York, there are 15-minute tests, you know, like who validates those tests? Like who feels comfortable with those tests? What are you doing on your off time? Like, do you consider yourself safe? You know, in a typical environment, not a COVID environment. Bless you.
Thank you. It's not COVID, I swear.
I believe it. In a typical environment, let's say you have people who are having non-barrier sex with each other, you know, they'll say like, hey, I'm also having sex with other people, but we are using barriers. You're the only person I'm not using barriers. Oh, there was a problem this one time, the condom broke. You're going to tell that to the person that you're having non-barrier sex with, right? So in this particular case, you're going to talk about interactions. Oh, my child is in school, you know, in a building with a bunch of other children. So I am a very risky person. So maybe I'm going to take a 15-minute COVID test the day that I'm going to meet with somebody and see how those results, fall forward and see how that happens. But if I'm doing something public right after that, then I have violated that boundary. So these are just examples, like now that certain things are available to us, we can use them to our benefit. I don't want us to be, like anxiously doing COVID tests, but also just being aware that you have more options than you did in March, and there are ways to communicate. And learning how to communicate that. So I just gave a few examples of my own personal life and the conversations that I've been having with my partners.
It's really interesting because I never thought about it that way, in the sense of, obviously all of us work with eforia, and consent is a huge center point of what we do about teaching those boundaries. But it is interesting that COVID has sort of helped us to have those kind of conversations. And the more we can have these kind of awkward conversations, the more that we will do them, because you get more used to them. And I mean, I even had to do them with my group of friends, that we created our own bubble, and one of them went out and it was like, how do we approach this? But then that we had that first time, then it just makes it more easy. So, I think you're right that it's creating kind of this type of communication amongst all of us. It's really important.
And it removes the sexual stigma, right? With the sexual stigma, people are afraid to talk about it because they're afraid that they're suggesting something about people that, they're not trying to offend. People are uncomfortable talking about sex. All of these reasons why people don't have the conversations, why they don't carry condoms with them, why they're not like protecting themselves. There's a million reasons and excuses for why they're not doing the thing that's the safest for them. Yeah. And COVID just like took all of that out and said, you still have to have this conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of sounds almost like it comes down to judgment, right? Like, historically, like women tend to get very much judged if they want to have open conversations about sexuality. There's a lot of stigma associated with anyone who doesn't live like a very heteronormative lifestyle and doesn't follow like very traditional like gender forms. And now almost like similar kind of judgment, I think, exists in the conversations that we have with people that we just want to have some kind of social relationships with. That, oh, hey, well, I am not even ever leaving the house while you're going out while wearing a mask, while you're going out and not wearing a mask. So suddenly there's like levels of judgment imposed on that. But at the end of the day, you're right. It comes down to being able to have the conversation about boundaries, setting them very clearly, and making sure that if you have broken the boundary, like that the friend group or your sexual circle or what have you, or your intimate partnership, you're okay with that. It's like a safe space to say, hey, I've broken this boundary. Like, what are we going to do about this? Maybe we shouldn't see each other for the next few days. I'm going to go get a test, whatever you need to do to feel safe so that we can stay in that intimate relationship with each other, right?
Exactly. And also not being punitive. I think it's really important that people recognize that like people are going to make mistakes. People are going to do things on a whim. And so like you could be disappointed without being punishing or judgmental. And I've had this conversation.
And that applies to yourself as well, right? Because I think people also tend to be very hard and judgmental of themselves. Like, oh no, I fucked up, or
Yep.
I'm not doing this right. I'm not handling this well. And I hear this a lot from my friends, like, I'm not doing well. And I think we all have to recognize these are not normal times. No one is doing well. Like if you got up and you got dressed today, you're already doing well, right?
Well, I also think that people need to recognize that if you're doing well, there's something wrong with you. Like, let's be real. We are not set up to be doing well right now. We're not in an environment that anybody is doing well right now. Even if like, oh, let's say your job got, better. Maybe you're selling more stuff because whatever you're doing is beneficial to people in this environment. And so your business improved and your relationship happened to have improved, which I randomly saw. Like I've seen people, especially parents, have interestingly better relationships. I mean, it's not common, but I've seen it happen.
Because of the being locked out, like in the lockdown and.
Yeah, so what happens is often one parent has the more prominent parenting role than the other, and usually their incomes are lower, and a lower income tends to be devalued because there's no monetary, there's no number that you could put on parenting. And so the lockdown has given a lot of the parents who are the primary earners the ability to see what is going on at home and how difficult it is to be a full-time parent or even a primary parent, and how much of a sacrifice that is. And so, at least with empathy, it has definitely shifted a lot of those dynamics, which is nice to see. It hasn't helped many relationships that I've seen, but it has helped some. And so even if everything's improving for you during COVID, the rest of the environment is terrifyingly scary. Like, it's just intense, everywhere else that you're looking.
Well, it's not just COVID at this point. Like, there's
political unrest. There's a lot of uncertainty. We still don't know what our futures hold. Like, we're all waiting for this vaccine, and we don't even know if that vaccine is going to be something we can rely on for very long. So uncertainty is going to affect people in many, many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. But you bring up a really good point. And I'm curious about like the specific instances and different situations people might find themselves in right now. One of them you just mentioned, which is maybe previously somebody had like the high earner job and they were away from home a lot while the other parent stayed home. And now these people are spending way more time together. They're like, there's no escape, right? They're trapped in a relationship in the same place. There might be a child also at home, or multiple children, a pet, or multiple pets. How do you maintain intimacy? How do you maintain like sexual wellness at a time like that in such an environment, as we're setting up for like many more months of the same?
Right. So it is a challenge and takes a lot of effort. And I think that a lot of people don't think to put effort into their relationships, which is why they keep devolving over time. But the reality is that if you're not putting effort into the relationship, you're putting effort into the, devolution of it, right? Like, you always have to work towards the relationship, towards the partnership. You can't just get married and shut off, or reach a point and then stop. There's no stopping. It's a constant progress. And so in this particular case, each partner needs to talk about their needs and how to get their needs met. So one of the needs, that is inherent in most relationships. Oh, my dog is visiting.
She wants wine as well.
Oh yeah, I believe that. So one of the things that's really important for a relationship is differentiation. And normally that happens because people have their own lives, and so they separate from each other, either for work or hobbies or whatever it is, and then they come back together and they have something to discuss. They have something that's important to them. But without differentiation, because you're like in the house all the time, constantly around each other, you need to find other ways to differentiate. So this might mean, like, if you have more than one room, the partner is going to be in a different room while the weather is still good, each of you going outside and doing something separately. Or one of you is outside while the other's inside, and then you switch. You have to find your way, and you have to talk to each other and just find something that's important to you. Or picking up a hobby that's not necessarily invasive. So as much as I really encourage people learning instruments, if you don't live in a house with a soundproof room, that's not going to be helpful for your relationship. If you could be outside, that'll be great, but not everybody has that option. So picking up a hobby or a skill that you've been trying to figure out, a language or whatever it is, on your own, that you're not necessarily doing with your partner, but also picking up things to do with your partner. That might be board games. It might be, like a movie series. I had a friend who created an entire Facebook page dedicated to watching all the movies created by A24. And it started out, and it started out as a pet project between him and his partner. And then they decided to bring friends into it, and then it just blew up, and they have hundreds of people on it, and they get to decide what's the next movie, and they talk about it. Right?
Yeah,
it's fun. It sounds fun.
Cool.
And apparently A24 has done a lot. So
you'll take us through this pandemic and the next then.
Oh yeah, they started it in the beginning of the pandemic, and they're still watching new movies. So like
Wow.
new things that they haven't seen yet. So it's been 6 months, and every week they've been checking out a new movie. So everybody's finding their way. Creativity is really where it's at. You need to look, within yourself and figure out what's going to be fun for you. And also, don't be afraid to start something that you might end up quitting. That's okay. It's okay to quit. There's like no reason not to if you're not interested anymore. I have a few projects that I started that I never continued with. So.
Because if not, it's just you being hard on yourself already during a hard time about
Right.
something that is supposed to help you.
Yeah, just like learning to enjoy something and also like being tapped into what's important to you.
Yeah.
So, for example, some people get into coloring a lot, but I'm the kind of person that gets really stressed out about consistency and colors and making choices. And so I can't do coloring, but what I can do are scratch pads because you make no decisions. You just literally follow the lines. And so scratch pads have been a great thing for me. Not good for my carpal tunnel, but very good for me in general.
I tried puzzles, but then the very competitive side of me after I finished it was like, okay, now you need to do it, and you can't look at the picture when you do it. And I was like, this isn't helping you, Mel.
Right. So you've been challenging yourself in ways that are not helpful.
Yeah, exactly. So I need to go to scratch pads or try something else.
Yes.
And what about? Oh,
yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. Another thing that like I found was really helpful to me was getting more politically involved in ways that I could. So one of the things that I did was write postcards to swing states. So like you see my pile here, I can't send it until October 26th.
I saw yours on Instagram. That's awesome.
Yes.
You should follow Rachel on Instagram. We'll put your handle.
Rachel_sex_therapy. Yeah. Make it nice and easy for you. But you had a question?
Yeah, I was just saying like, well, I mean, so these have been tips for, people in relationships, but what about people that live alone? And what about if right now you're just, you're kind of struggling with everything that's going on and you're maybe not feeling very sexual because you're just feeling anxious about the state of the universe at this point. What are tips that you've been giving your clients or other people about what they can do when that happens?
Well, first of all, it's okay not to feel sexual. Like 100% okay to not feel good in your body right now. But there are ways to start feeling good about yourself, right? So one of the things that I have done consistently since the beginning is I get dressed up every day. I get dressed up every day because I like getting dressed up. And I have worn cocktail dresses and heels to walk my dog. And people in my new neighborhood now know me as the lady who gets dressed up to walk her dog. And they're always complimenting me on my outfit. So it's been a very encouraging experience for me. So these are some things that do things that make you feel good in your body. And I know that there's a lot of, there may be a lot of desire to just stay in sweats, but if you're not feeling good about yourself in sweats, then don't stay in sweats. I've played with my appearance in many different ways. I messed with my hair, with my makeup, right? I'm doing things that I couldn't normally do because I have more time to myself. I don't have to dress up to go somewhere. I can now dress up the way that I want to try out. And what's the risk? So first acknowledging what's the risk? You don't have a risk. You could do whatever you want and figure it out. So that's the first thing is getting in touch with your own needs and your own wants. Also a lot of reading, you could read Literotica. Obviously the Eforia app has been a great experience for many of my clients, in particular one that not only did she experience the best orgasms of her very senior life, but she has been getting the best sleep of her life as a former now sufferer of restless leg syndrome.
Amazing.
Right? Apparently,
yeah, we'll do cheers to your client.
Cheers to the client.
The cure for restless leg.
Yeah, so these are just some basic things that are not sexual, but just being aware of your body. The other things that you can do are, just touching yourself, like remembering that your body exists. And a lot of times people take for granted that they have one and that they have, right? You know, and notice what feels nice. Right? I like to play with my hair. Sometimes, you know, like pull on earlobes. Like, what are things that never even occur to you that you might actually enjoy the sensation of, and notice sensations in your body that you can create for yourself. These are like really important things to do in general. And notice them visually, right? Like some people are visual people and that's really important to them. I am a big friend of the hand mirror. Yes, take the hand mirror, look at your body, look at different aspects of your body that you cannot see. That includes your back, right? Like not just your genitals, as much as that is the most common place that people use hand mirrors to check out, but look at parts of your body that are not as accessible to you. Notice things about your skin. What has changed? You know, what do you like? What do you dislike? What are things that, you know, what are things that you want to do for yourself? What's important for you in those moments? And it's okay to take a break, and it's okay to just like not give a shit about it right now. Like 100% okay to not care, because there are so many things to worry about.
I think that's probably like the biggest and most important message we can just, if we can impart one thing tonight on everybody, it's that you shouldn't have judgment. Like everything is okay really at this point. If you've survived another day, it's okay. I'm also really curious about people who are just trying to date somehow in, you know, in this very like difficult, interesting time. I know one big trend lately has been video dates. I myself have certainly like taken advantage of the Zoom happy hours with random people I met on Hinge or like on a dating app. But it's interesting.
I have my first one tomorrow, so we'll see.
Yeah, very
Congratulations.
but I know for some people, they will also take that to the next level, which is maybe because they can't meet up in person, they will try to see how they can advance the relationship sexually via video. Do you have any advice for people who are just starting out or thinking about this?
Okay, so first, a fun little anecdote is that I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish environment where there's a belief that men and women should not touch each other until they get married, and only people who are married to each other or who are in the same family are permitted to touch, you know, in opposite sex experiences. And so when they date, they don't touch. They just hang out. And so I've been on a few dates where I wasn't touching my partners, like people that I have had sex with that I was no longer touching. And it immediately brought me into this, like, I didn't even do this when I was dating, you know, like for marriage. Like I didn't even do this, and now I'm doing it, which is ironic, but there is a way to approach that. So if you're going to meet in person but socially distant, you know, like build the tension, you know, create that sexual tension. And if you really want to learn where you could do that, check out Bollywood movies, because they're not allowed to show you sexual interaction. And so all of the sexual tension happens in the eye gaze, which is perfect because we're blocking everything else out. You know,
none of us have legs down in 2020.
Yeah, we don't know.
Oh, we only see this. So.
So it's, you know, it's in the eyes, it's in, and this is obviously like, this is the in-person part that is socially distant. But when you're virtual, you have a lot more access to things that, you know, like had this happened in the 90s, we would have been so screwed. You know, like first of all, the most obvious one is something called teledildonics, which is, you know, sex toys that are controlled via the internet. Wonderful invention, a little expensive though, so, you know, everybody in their own thing. But these are also ways to get into modes of sexuality that may not have been an option for you in a more normative experience. So a lot of BDSM, you know, relates to like dominant and submissive dynamics where, and sometimes there's a switch, so it can go, you know, like you could take turns. But the idea would be you would kind of instruct a partner, you know, to do something to their body, and, you know, you could listen to each other, you could visually record it, you know, however you feel comfortable. And I do want to put this out there, do not do this with anybody you don't trust, especially if it's on video, because if you don't trust them, they could easily record it, and that could end up on, you know, Pornhub or 4chan. Like I don't want to be responsible for that, so I should let you know.
You have to be careful.
you have to trust the person that you're doing this with. Or you could do it not on video, which is, you know, some people just don't like being on video, so sounds are perfectly acceptable. You know, pictures that disappear, which you could do on Snapchat or Telegram or whatever. So there are so many technological advances that allow you to maintain your privacy while also having a good time. You know, and being free again with your body and how you want to, you know, how you want to present yourself to your partner. So that is the actual sex stuff. Other things you could do, you know, I've done this thing where I've instructed partners who were living together, long-term relationships, but they kind of lost their sexual spark and didn't know how to communicate face-to-face about what they like. So they wrote an ongoing story where they kind of kept changing hands after every couple of sentences. And then they built up the sexual experience like in a literotica form. And that's been really amazing for them.
That's so cool.
Right? And really they were very interested in learning about each other. They were like, oh, I didn't know you were into that. Or do you really want to try that? Or is this something that's just for the papers, you know, like just to write down? And this was a really fun way for them to get to know each other. And this is a really fun sexuality experience, which funny enough is how I passed the time with all of my best friends in college, you know, like in lectures that were boring. Like, this is what we did. Of course, it got sexual. And that's how we, you know, we were like, oh, I didn't know you were into that. Like, that's really cool. And, you know, this is how I learned about sexuality before I knew that I wanted to go to sex school. So really fun ways to do things. And again, creativity is where it's at.
Absolutely. I love that. And definitely, I want to reiterate the message about safety. And I think this is also another great opportunity to practice talking about boundaries and consent. Just because you're not having a sexual experience in person doesn't mean you don't need to have this conversation. Unless you mention it, people may not know that they can't like take a screenshot of you while you may be exposed on the screen because you are, you know, video sexing or something like that. You have to discuss all of this stuff up front. You have to explain what it is you're comfortable with. And if you don't feel comfortable at any point, it's still totally okay to say no, even if you're halfway through an experience. If suddenly something strikes you as this isn't going great, I suddenly like have a bad feeling, it's okay to stop.
Absolutely, as it is in person. And you know what, you have the ability to just hang up.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you can hang up and walk away. You're not trapped in a space with this person. And nobody is important enough to you if they're violating you, right? Like, there's no relationship that's important enough to be violated time and time again.
Absolutely. That was so helpful, Rachel. Thank you so much for all these really great tips. I definitely learned a lot, and I cannot wait to go back and talk about some boundaries with my my friends on Tinder.
I'd love to know about that if you want to share.
Absolutely. So yeah, thank you for chatting with us today. Tune in for another video airing soon where Rachel is going to be talking with us about her sex therapy practice and answering top questions that people might have about sexual wellness and their sexual discovery. You can also read Rachel's advice column on the Eforia app or write to her anonymously with your own questions. Thanks all. Good night.